Check out this property and that view and these plants. Hi, I'm the Grow Boss, and this is my new series, 99 Plants with me, the Grow Boss. And since this is the first video in the series, I thought I would give you an introduction to the operation and show you around before we really started getting into it. So, in each video, I'll go over what we did since the last video and what we have planned until the next one. And in each episode, I will show you all the products and skills we're using to do this. And the best part is, we are going to do time-lapse photography and close-up photography too, so we can really get into it. Then, as we go, we will record all that information in my 20-week garden trackers so we can see and compare the results over time. After all, if you want to get better, you can never have too many data points. Now, let's start by inspecting the property, then I'll introduce you to the plants. We'll go over what we did to switch them into flower. And finally, there's one more introduction to make, because just like with any project of this size, there's the guy that does all the work and the guy that gets all the credit. Oh, whatever. Okay, so let me introduce you to the Bushmaster. And while you're trying to figure out which one of us does all the work and which one of us gets all the credit, I am going to get started on next week's chores, while the Bushmaster here tells you about all the work I did since last week. Okay, this is my dog Ralph, and he loves it out here. And this is week 1 flower. And when you grow outdoors, they absolutely take off, because look at those buds. And that's at the end of week 1. Look how close the nodes are. Okay, so this is the small tent, and while it is important that we inspect each plant every week, it would be impossible for me to show you all that. So for this series, we're just tracking a select few plants week after week. Now, let me show you all the plants so you can get a feel for the operation, and then next week, I'll introduce you to the specific plants we'll be tracking. This is the small tent, and in here there's 14 plants, so we're going to identify them from left to right and front to back. This will be row A and row B, plants 1 through 7, and B1, B2, and B7. And this is our first run, so you can see not everything is symmetrical and not everything is 100% dialed in yet, but then hey, you can't finish if you don't start. You can't win if you don't try. And that's why I always say your third grow is your first grow. And that's because once you stop killing your plants and they start to grow like they're supposed to, the last lesson you guys always learn is topping and lollipopping. Trust me, I see it all the time at the store. Anyway, before we go look at the plants in the big tent, I just want to point out that we just did a quick inspection of the equipment. Okay, everything looks good here. Same thing here in this tent. We are going to start with a quick inspection of the property and equipment. Looks good. And these are measuring sticks we are going to install this week so you can judge how big the plants are actually getting with the time-lapse photography. So the trellis is up, no wind damage thankfully, and I say that because in this tent there's a problem. Not only because the broad side of the structure is unprotected and faces the wind, but because someone didn't buy enough tarp to cover it all the way down to the ground, because it turns out the roof is a hoop and not flat and straight across, and they didn't actually measure it, and it's further around a circle than it is a square. Oh, whatever. Okay, there are 28 plants in this tent, and we are going to name them the same way we did in the smaller tent, from left to right and front to back. That means 4 rows, C, D, E, and F, And with 7 plants in each, this will be C1, and the last in this row will be C7, and this will be D1 and D7, and so on. Now, let's check on the outside plants. All right, now these 9 plants are out here because we ran out of room inside the tents. And since the show is called 99 Plants and we weren't at our limit yet, I figured let's put them out here. Besides, what are the 2 things I always tell you good growers complain about? That's right, their girlfriends hate trimming and their plants got too big for the light. Same thing here, we just grew too many, too big. What a terrible problem, right? But the best thing is, when growing outside, your plants will never get too big for the light or too close to it. And while we definitely have too many to keep in the tents, because overcrowding makes it easier for bugs and other problems to spread, growing out here offers no protection from the wind or from direct sun. That's why these outside plants are the canaries in the coal mine. They are literally the most exposed plants on the property, and so these plants have the highest chance of showing us any problems first, whether that be too much direct light because they're not covered, or from an attack by bugs or birds or other wildlife, because everything eats cannabis. My point is, if there is a problem, I'm hoping these plants will be our sacrifice to the yield gods. But then, for all I know, they may be better protected from attack because they're on the grass. I really have no idea because this is our first round growing out here. So, over the next 10 weeks, I guess we'll find out together. Okay, we finished inspecting the property. Now let's focus on some of the plants we'll be tracking for the rest of the grow and the chores we've done since the last video. But before we do that, don't forget, later in the video, we'll go over how important it is to shape your plant before going into flower. And whether you're growing outdoors, under the sun like this, or indoors, under artificial lights, the lessons are always the same. Less is more, don't overwater, don't overfeed, and remember, we use the same products to grow cannabis outdoors that we use indoors. And while we can't give the plant too much light out here, for sure you can when growing indoors. And that's because growing cannabis is basically the same process no matter what. If we don't kill them, they grow like a fucking weed. All I have to do is feed with Humboldt nutrients, add great white microbes for the roots, and prepare our cuttings with Clonex gel, mist, plugs, and solution. And whether you're growing inside or out, or naturally, or organically, or inorganically, you're going to test your ultimate RO water with a GrowBoss Megameter. Why? Because all of these are the top brands and products in our industry, and these are the exact products that I sell in my hydro store. And if good growers are buying these products, it's because they trust them. Sure, you could experiment or try something new, but what do you think you're going to discover? Besides, why would you want to learn all the lessons on your own like that? It's expensive and time-consuming, and growing cannabis is all about getting on that rotation and sticking to it, because that's where the money is. And that's why I recommend these products, because I sell them in my store, and I use them on the daily for my garden. Okay, let's get back to the plants now. Okay, so this is the part of the video where we go over all the chores that I had to do since the last episode. And sure, it may look like the Bushmaster's doing all the work, but trust me, it's all me, right? So this week, it's bug traps. And basically, there are 2 types of traps that we're going to use, and they are the blue ones and the yellow ones. And there are some very clear differences between them. Care to tell us what they are, Bushmaster? Okay, the blue ones are for crawlers and the yellow ones are for flyers. Well, if you're so smart then, why do we clip the blue ones to the bottom of the plants and hang the yellow ones? Fine, whatever. The Bushmaster is right. Crawlers and flyers was not a very good answer. A better response would have been the blue traps are for leaf miners and other crawlers, and these are what those bugs look like. And the yellow traps are for aphids and whiteflies and other things that fly around, and these are what those look like. And I know the Bushmaster and I joke about crawlers and flyers, but the reality is you don't have to know every bug out there. In fact, you don't even have to know all the local ones. When it comes right down to it, you only have to know the ones that get stuck, because who knows what's going to stick to these things? Like, I seriously worry about the local wildlife, that I might find scary, the tarantula hunting wasp that lives in the front yard stuck to it. Or I'm going to come out and find Hunter, our local roadrunner, stuck to one of them. Like, I'm out here growing cannabis trying to enjoy the experience. I didn't come out here to wreck the environment. That's why I sneak over and feed the neighbors' animals every couple days, because they look kind of thin, right? Ralph loves them too. Who doesn't love bacon? And why are goats so mean? Okay, so we hung up 4 of these in each tent and clipped 10 of these to the bottom of each plant, and we even hung some on the outside plants. That way, next week, we can all meet back here and read and document the results and act upon that information if necessary. Now, let me show you what we did to switch the garden into flowering. Okay, so the season is starting to change. The days are cooler now, and soon the nights will start getting cold out here. But that also means the sun is lower on the horizon now, and that the days are getting shorter and the nights longer, which means it's time to start flowering. So the Bushmaster here took down the lights, because we don't need them anymore. See, we were using them to extend the day, because it doesn't take much light to keep the plants from flowering as it does to grow them. And just this single string of 60-watt bulbs was enough to keep them from flowering. We just left them on all night. But that's the beauty of growing outdoors. No matter how big the plants are, they never get too close to the light. Know what I mean? And you know how growers are always talking about spectrum of light and UVA and UVB and HPS versus MH and LEDs and CMH and compact fluorescents and T5s? Well, this week's lesson is about transitioning, but next week I'm going to tell you some information about the light spectrum that will blow your mind, so watch for that. For now, though, we would usually be giving these plants their second to last trim, but I did all that last week, so we'll get into that a little more in the next episode when the plants have had time to stretch and grow back from their last trimming. But for now, I want you to look at their shape and take the time to really appreciate just how perfectly I shaped them. And that's important because the density of the bud may truly be the only real difference, visual or otherwise, between indoor and outdoor cannabis. And if we can direct all of her energy into as few stalks as possible, then our buds will be as big and as dense as possible, which is what we want. And the same thing is true when growing indoors, right? Because the density of the bud, when it comes to bag appeal, is as important as the smell. Remember, there's a lot that goes into great bud, and there is no one week that is any more important than any other. Besides, you've never looked at a bag of weed and said, that was grown with an LED, or a T5, or a 400-watt light, or a 1,000-watt light. And you have probably never declined a sack of weed before it was cured too long, or because you thought it was grown outdoors, or because you thought it was grown with an LED light. The reality is, it doesn't matter if you're growing indoor in tents like these, or under LEDs, or HIDs, or outside tents like these. You have to get everything right. You have to get all 12 weeks right if you want that top dollar bud. Before we move on, I want to show you one more thing. It's our next crop in the veg room. And that's because we're going to be flowering year-round at this location. And because we can't veg outside right now, we're starting our next crop indoors. Which is why this show is called 99 Plants, even though we only have 42 in flower right now. But again, we'll get more into that in the next episode. And now that our chores are done, we can sit back, smoke a little, and take a moment to reflect on what we did this week. And I thought I would share some knowledge with you while I did that. Think about this. Even though we are transitioning into flower, outdoors is no different than transitioning indoors. We feed her the same way next time that we did last time. And I know the internet tells you to switch to flower nutrients as soon as you start flowering. And I know you want to switch to flower nutrients as soon as you start flowering because you are so very excited. But let's think about that for a minute. Plants don't respond like people, do they? Something we do today, like transitioning her into flower, might not show any visible confirmation for 2 weeks. So, when transitioning into flower, why would you automatically change or increase the light or the nutrients? My point is, tomorrow, this plant will be the same as she was today. And if you're growing indoors and in veg and transitioning into flower, why do you think changing the light cycle also automatically means dramatically increasing the light or dramatically increasing the nutrients, especially if a plant takes 2 weeks to respond? Think about that. We were keeping the outdoor plants in veg with nothing more than this string of 60-watt lights, and tomorrow the sun will rise and throw down the same light it did today, and the only difference will be these 60-watt lights, because I assure you, the plants didn't get any closer to it. But it is enough to start the transition into flower, and that's why I always tell you less is more, and the number one problem indoor growers have is too much light. Okay, thanks for watching. I'm the Grow Boss, and if you like this video, subscribe to the channel. And in the next episode, we're going to go over the bug traps and check them to see what we caught. And I'm going to explain everything you need to know about light spectrum. So stay tuned for that. And if you have any questions between now and then, you can always schedule a consult with me on my helpline. Trust me, I know how much you've spent and how much time you have invested in this, and I promise I can fix your garden in about an hour. So, call before you quit.